Hi, I'm Rachel, and I'm here to chronicle my week of reading for the week of March 26th through April 1st, so the last week of March 2018. The book that I finished this week was Girls Burn Brighter by Shobha Rao. It is a book that just came out this month that I think is getting a lot of accolades, at least so far as I can see. I saw it got a Kirkus-starred review. Anyway, it is a story that takes place in a very impoverished part of India, and it is the story of two girls named Purnima and Savitha. They share a couple of formative years together while Savitha works the loom at Purnima's father's hut, while the father's trying to get Purnima married. And then there's a violent act that tears the girls apart, and things happen in life and yada yada, and ultimately the girls try to find each other again, or really Purnima tries to find Savitha again, and it takes her on a cross-global journey. I think one thing I'll say about Shobha Rao's writing is that I think she has a power in short story writing that doesn't necessarily transfer over to the longer form. I think maybe it's the condensed form where she can draw out characters and emotions more uniformly, I think it is. I think when it comes to this longer novel, I think maybe some of the relationships are sort of quickly defined, and there's just parts of the plot that are rapidly gone over. It just didn't feel as rich as her short stories, I suppose. But by the end of the story, which the story is largely about the ways that women are used and abused by men in this society, and also, a little bit in American society when you're a poor girl with no means. But anyway, it's about the ways that women are used and abused in various contexts, and but Rao keeps it from being like tragedy porn, as it were, and she focuses on not the acts of violence themselves, but on what these acts of violence can do to a person and how people can survive these acts of violence. And I think that's something I always look for in a book, because going back to something I talk about a lot, I am a little jaded when it comes to the idea of the strong female character all the time, the female character who can constantly kick ass and get her way out of every situation by being a ninja, basically. I don't like it in men either, but anyway, this is a story about interior strength, and Purnima and Savitha, they struggle, and especially near the end of the story when so many bad things are happening, I mean, the accumulation of it, they struggle, but they don't completely succumb. Certainly not throughout most of the story, because if they had completely succumbed to the horrible things that happened to them, then there'd be no more story, because they'd just basically lay down and die. So what Rao does is she chronicles this interior struggle and this interior light, as she names it. So I thought I'd read a little bit of a section that talks about that a little bit and alludes to the title of the book in one of Savitha's sections. It can be difficult, too, to find sections of the book to read, because I don't want to give away spoilers, I guess, about the specific things that happen to the girls, but, as I say, it's about the ways that men use and abuse women, so some of it, I think, is pretty self-explanatory. Like, I think I can get away with saying that this scene takes place in a brothel. Her third and final thought was this: she needed an advantage. There were only a few clear advantages in the world. She obviously had no money. Her only skill was weaving, and she could barely read or write. This left only one thing: her body. My body, she thought, looking down at the now used-up husk of a girl that she had once been. The chest still flat, the hands still big, the skin still dark. She moved then to the mirror, the small round mirror framed by green plastic, hanging by a nail on a wall opposite the bed. She'd not once looked into it, not once, but now she took it down and studied her face. Her eyes, her lips, her nose, the curve of her cheeks, the sweep of her lashes. She moved the mirror closer, then farther. She tilted it, she straightened it, she looked, and there, just there, what was that? Stop, she said out loud into the emptiness of the room. Hold it there. And so she held it there. And that was when she saw it. Had it always been there? That lamp glowing from within. How had it survived all of these previous months? How had it held on? No matter, it was greater than her body. It was greater than all else. She laughed for perhaps the first time since that night in the weaving hut, to see it there, to know that it was hers. And then later she makes a deal with basically the owner of the brothels in the village where she's kept. And anyway, here, going from here, we have each time he'd ask her how many bananas she'd earned that month. 6, she'd say, or 5. You like them that much? He'd ask. They keep me from forgetting, she'd say. Forgetting what? Savitha would only smile and burn brighter. This section from Purnima really got to me too by the visceral emotion of it. I guess I'll spoil a little bit more to say part of what she suffers is physical deformity that's inflicted upon her. And she is responding to a fellow girl who is reacting negatively to her out of fear because of this deformity. She felt something rise inside of her, something bitter, something angry, and she spit out, "You fool!" She heard the girl back away from the door. "You fool!" she cried again, and heard the girl whimper. "What a fool you are," she thought, fuming. "What fools we all are, we girls, afraid of the wrong things at the wrong times, afraid of a burned face, when outside waiting for you are fires you cannot imagine, men holding matches up to your gasoline eyes, flames, flames all around you, licking at your just-born breasts, your just-bled body. And infernos, infernos as wide as the world, waiting to impoverish you, to make you ash, and even the wind, even the wind, even the wind, my dear," she thought, "watching you burn, willing it, passing over you and through you, scattering you because you are a girl, because you are ash. And you're afraid of me?" Anyway, that goes on from there. There's a lot more specifics about Purnima and Savitha and their relationship and what keeps them going, and I don't want to spoil any more than I already have. But I will say that by the end of the book, when things are sort of at their most dark, I was sobbing. I was absolutely sobbing at the end of this book. And I don't want to be too jaded to say that it was because of the fact that it was sort of low-hanging fruit because these women suffered so much, because I don't think it was that. I really think it was how Rao wrote about the breaking of what breaks someone that strong. And I thought that she did so well with that internal conflict, and I just, maybe there's parts I can still be a little cynical about. Maybe it's a little out there that Purnima could chase Savitha across the world. Maybe it's a little too much, maybe, but at the same time I think it's something I needed, because something about that visceral human connection, about the one relationship that keeps these girls going, the people that actually see each other as people and not as commodities to be used. And it was just so beautiful, and I think Rao really did do something remarkable with this book. So yeah, I guess overall consensus is I think she's stronger at short stories, but this is still worth a lot. Next is the book I haven't finished yet. What can I say? This is Who Fears Death by Nnedi Okorafor, my final book of March. I'm over halfway through, and it's a long book, I'll give it that, and it moves quickly. It's a very compelling read. It takes place in a dystopian African future, although I feel like that description doesn't really mean much. It doesn't have the usual trappings of a dystopian world. It could be a fantasy world far, far away, or I think it could even be a pre-industrial world if it weren't for some mentions of computers. But I know part of it is me responding to this African sub-Saharan environment that I'm not personally used to, but that's really where it shines, this world building that Okorafor gives us, where she builds up these villages in Africa, and what makes them tick and their cultural influences and drives between people. It's a very violent world. Like the other book, there's a lot of violence against women in particular. It has more of a defined racial purpose. The main character is called an Iwu, which means that she is the child of an Okeke mother and a Nuru father, and in general the Okeke are dark-skinned slaves to the Nuru, and a lot of the Nuru are trying to eradicate the Okeke people, like a genocide where they attack villages and brutally rape women in the hopes of making these Iwu babies who are lighter skinned. It's the racial aspect, or the skin color aspect, the colorism aspect certainly comes into it. And anyway, our main character grows up. For a while she and her mother are nomadic desert wanderers, and ultimately they're able to join another Okeke village, which is far removed from the violence of the village that her mother came from. And our main character, whose name is Onye, that's her her nickname anyway, which is easier to say, she grows up in this community. She goes through some rites with some fellow girls her own age. She gets a boyfriend, as it were, not that they would call it that, but who is another Iwu child, and the two of them are unique for being Iwu children. It's a very rare thing to see them in civilization, that is. But anyway, beyond this socio-political aspect, there's also a magical aspect to the story where Onye has ability for magical powers. Turns out her birth father was a sorcerer, and she herself has powers that she ultimately learns how to use. And Okorafor does really well, I think, in building up what these powers mean and how they work. And she does a very good job in building up Onye as a stubborn, somewhat aggressive character. And ultimately, she and her friends go on this quest that I guess feels a little more traditional to what I know of fantasy quests, where people rise up to fight the bad evil, like to go on a journey and, you know, confront her sorcerer father who wants to rule the world, as it were, to put it in easy general terms. And that's sort of where I'm in the middle of right now, so that's all I can say about that. There's a lot of characters, and I guess I find it difficult to keep track of all of them. I don't necessarily think her character building is her strength in this. They serve the needs of the plot, but not a lot more than that, other maybe than Onye. But where she thrives is in this world building, this magical and socio-political world building, and that's enough. You know, that's enough in a science fiction novel to keep your interest, or to keep my interest anyway, so that I'm really interested to see where the story goes next. I hope that Onye gets her due. There's also a sort of morbidly philosophical element to the story coming from the title, Who Fears Death, which has to do with part of her magic being understanding and confronting how she herself will die. So I'm curious to see how that will fit in, because actually it seems like the story is narrated from the future. Every now and then we get italic sections that seems like Onye is narrating her girlhood from a prison cell. So we're definitely inching closer to something dire in that respect, but so far I'm hooked for the journey, and I'm expecting it'll stay that way. And from here I will go into my April 2018 reading, which I haven't started yet, but hey, it's April 1st as I'm filming this, and April 2nd as I'm uploading it, so I still got a lot of time here. I want to start with this book. This is called Shelter by Jung Yun. It is a book that maybe some of you who have watched some of my earlier videos from months ago might recognize that I hauled from the library back in, well, in January, February time. It's a book that won the Reading Women Award for Best Fiction in 2016. That's Kendra Winchester's podcast. She's a fellow booktuber, talks a lot about literary fiction, particularly written by women, and her podcast is with her friend Autumn. And I've really been looking forward to this book, but I kept on putting it off and putting it off as other books clamored for my attention in these last few months. But I just renewed this book for the third time from my library, and that is the limit. So either I read it now or I forever hold my peace, or at least until I can check it out again. So I thought, why not just read it now? This is a book about an Asian American man whose life abruptly changes when his elderly parents have to move in with him and his wife, and I believe his children. And it brings old resentments and tensions from childhood back up to the surface, and I am very much looking forward to this because I love me some family drama. And finally, I have this book. This I hauled much more recently from the library. This is Surprised by God, How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love Religion by Danya Ruttenberg. Since it is a library book, I want to make sure to read it first, I suppose, so that I can get it back in time. I am reading this book as part of my Sammy Rohr project. The Sammy Rohr Prize is awarded annually either to an emerging writer in fiction or nonfiction, and this month I want to read and review 3 books that were up for consideration in 2010. So this is a memoir that is up for consideration in 2010, and I will read from the flap. At 13, Danya Ruttenberg decided that she was an atheist. Watching the sea of adults standing up and sitting down at Rosh Hashanah services, and apparently giving credence to the patently absurd truth claims of the prayer book, she came to a conclusion. Karl Marx, I assume, was right. As a young adult, Danya immersed herself in the rhinestone-bedazzled wonderland of late 1990s San Francisco, attending Halloweens on the Castro, drinking smuggled absinthe with wealthy geeks, and plotting the revolution with feminist zine makers. But she found herself yearning for something she would eventually call God. As she began inhaling countless stories of spiritual awakenings of Catholic saints, Buddhist nuns, medieval mystics, and Hasidic masters, she learned that taking the yearning seriously would require much of her. Surprised by God is a religious coming-of-age story, from the mosh pit to the mission district and beyond. It's a memoir of a young woman who found, lost, and found again communities of like-minded seekers, all the while taking a winding, semi-reluctant path through traditional Jewish practice that eventually took her to the rabbinate. It is a post-dot-com, third-wave, punk rock, 7-story mountain, the story of integrating life on the edge of the 21st century into the discipline of traditional Judaism without sacrificing either. It is also a map through the hostile territory of the inner life, an unflinchingly honest guide to the kind of work that goes into developing a spiritual practice in today's world, and why, perhaps, doing this in today's world requires more work than it ever has. I can attest to that as someone who struggles to find a spiritually meaning life within Judaism. I haven't joined the rabbinate like she has. I probably haven't cleaved so much to traditional Judaism, but I'm very intrigued by this book, and I will report back. So that about covers it for me now. I just came back from a busy weekend with my family in Baltimore where I had a whole lot of fun hanging out with everyone, but it does feel like I didn't have a lot of time to myself to relax before starting the new week up again. Wine, 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 but what can you do? That's life. Gotta move ever onward. I'm looking forward to the new month in books and writing, hopefully in springtime, although I hear reports that the DC area will continue to get some cold weather and even snow, which, oh my god, I don't even know what to say. I don't know what to say. I'll just have to wait and see and deal with it as it comes, if it comes. In the meantime, thanks so much for watching, everyone. Happy spring reading, and I'll see you next time.